In 1963, an Australian colonel stood in the Pentagon and told a room of furious American generals their entire Vietnam strategy was broken. It's a tale of Colonel Ted Serong and the Australian task force, who faced not only a vicious enemy, but the institutional arrogance of the world's most powerful military, which dismissed their proven methods as irrelevant. What unfolds will reveal the brutal, patient tactics that yielded a stunning 10-to-1 kill ratio, expose the tragic cost of ignoring hard-won wisdom, and uncover the sobering truth about why winning every battle can still mean losing the war. Before we begin this journey together, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share this story with someone who understands that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the wisest, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Pentagon Briefing Room, May 23, 1963. Colonel Ted Serong faced a wall of American stars and oak leaves. The Australian advisor had just dismantled the logic of the Strategic Hamlet program, the cornerstone of U.S. strategy in Vietnam. "You're building them too fast," he stated calmly. "Your gaps are their gateways." Across the table, U.S. Marine General Victor "Brute" Krulak's fist came down like a gavel, a violent challenge later noted in the official minutes. His face flushed with indignation. Who was this officer from a nation of 11 million to question the architects of Normandy and Incheon? Serong didn't flinch. He'd expected this. The Americans had sought Australian expertise precisely because, as Secretary of State Dean Rusk had recently conceded, they knew little about jungle warfare. Yet when that expertise challenged conventional thinking, pride intervened. In that moment, none of the American commanders could envision the coming decade. They couldn't foresee that by 1968, their own doctrine would be quietly scrapped, replaced almost entirely by the methods this Australian colonel had outlined. They couldn't imagine a U.S. general would one day label an Australian operation the biggest intelligence coup of the war. And they certainly couldn't fathom the future statistics. American units expending 50,000 rounds per enemy kill, while Australian forces, using the outdated tactics dismissed in this room, would achieve 10-to-1 kill ratios. The strategic reversal was inevitable. The tragedy was its price. It would require 25,000 American deaths to come first. When Australian advisors arrived in Vietnam in 1962, they were met with polite skepticism. Led by Colonel Ted Serong, a veteran of jungle campaigns in New Guinea and Malaya, they brought hard-won expertise from a successful counterinsurgency. To the Americans, this seemed irrelevant. Their doctrine was built on a simple industrial-age premise: overwhelming firepower wins wars. Why creep through jungle when you could obliterate it? Their strategy was search and destroy, large sweeps to find the enemy, then massive artillery and airstrikes to annihilate him. Victory would come by attrition, by crossing the crossover point where enemy deaths outpaced replacements. The Australian philosophy, forged in the 12-year Malayan Emergency, was its opposite. Serong preached population security. Insurgents were fish in the sea of the people. The goal wasn't to hunt every fish, but to drain the sea. This meant small, silent patrols, meticulously planned ambushes, and targeting enemy logistics, not just fighters. It focused on controlling villages, not body counts. American commanders listened politely, then continued planning division-sized operations. A disastrous experiment in 1965, attaching an Australian battalion to an airborne brigade, proved the incompatibility. The Australian government then made a pivotal decision. They would establish their own independent task force, 1ATF, in Phước Tuy. The Battle of Long Tan in 1966 provided irrefutable proof. A single Australian company of 108 men, many using these very tactics, held off an enemy force estimated at 2,000 for 4 hours, inflicting catastrophic losses. The Pentagon took notes but didn't change course. The shock that finally broke American doctrine was the 1968 Tet Offensive. It exposed the failure of attrition strategy and led to General William Westmoreland's replacement by General Creighton Abrams. Abrams had been watching the Australians. In a stunning reversal, he declared an end to search and destroy. Henceforth, the priority would be small unit patrols, ambushes, and population security, the exact Australian model. The U.S. military began to adopt their methods: patient ambush warfare, intelligence-driven patrolling, and precise, disciplined use of firepower. By 1970, the statistical contrast was devastating. U.S. forces fired between 10,000 and 50,000 rounds per enemy kill. Australian forces achieved better results with a fraction of the ammunition because they fired only at clear targets. In Phước Tuy, one ATF had methodically collapsed the enemy's logistical system, destroying over 1,800 food caches and base camps. The local Viet Cong battalion was reduced to foraging for survival. Security in the province was tangible. Markets operated. Roads stayed open. A senior U.S. officer privately conceded, "We should have been fighting your way from the beginning." But the admission came too late. The tactical shift, though effective, began in 1968, 6 years from Serong's first warnings and after massive U.S. casualties had drained domestic political will. When one ATF withdrew in 1971, Phước Tuy quickly reverted to enemy control, proving the methods worked but required sustained presence. The ultimate vindication came decades later. The U.S. Army's 2006 Counterinsurgency Field Manual enshrined the principles of population security, intelligence-driven operations, and precise force, the core of the Australian approach. In Iraq and Afghanistan, U.S. generals like David Petraeus would cite the Malayan Emergency as their model, relearning the lessons the Australians had brought to Vietnam in 1962. The Australians had been tactically right from the start, proving that in counterinsurgency, patient control triumphs over brute firepower. The tragic lesson was that being right matters little if the student isn't ready to listen. The U.S. military eventually adopted the textbook, but only after the war it was meant to win had already been lost. The Australian campaign in Vietnam proved two profound and contradictory truths. First, that superior tactics are decisive. That population control, not body counts, wins guerrilla wars, and that professional soldiers, properly trained, can achieve remarkable results with minimal resources. The statistical record of better kill ratios and lower casualties is undeniable. But second, it proved a darker axiom: that tactical excellence is meaningless without coherent political strategy. Military success cannot redeem a strategic failure. The Australians had the right method from the beginning. The Americans admitted it in 1968, adopted it by 1970, and withdrew in 1973 anyway. They learned the lesson, but far too late. When Brigadier Ted Serong died in 2002, he never said, "I told you so." He didn't need to. The record spoke for itself. The methods he was dismissed for advocating in 1963 became the U.S. standard by 1970. Yet the Australian success also revealed the brutal limitation of even perfect tactics. Phước Tuy province was secure only while Australian forces were there to maintain the pressure. Victory in counterinsurgency isn't a one-time achievement. It is a condition that must be constantly sustained. For the U.S. military, the full absorption of these lessons took decades and 2 more wars. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the initial reliance on overwhelming firepower and large unit operations was a painful reprise of old mistakes. The eventual embrace of modern counterinsurgency doctrine in the 2000s was, in essence, a rediscovery of the Australian principles from 1962. The tragedy is measured in time and lives. 6 years from Serong's warning to its adoption, 25,000 American deaths in between, and incalculable Vietnamese suffering. They finally got it right, an Australian veteran once reflected. It just took them 40 years and 2 more wars. Now, when an American patrol moves silently, when an ambush is executed with precision, when population security is prioritized over a tally of the dead, the echo of that Australian voice from 1962 is finally heard. It stands as a somber lesson. Sometimes being right isn't enough. Sometimes you must wait for the world to catch up.